Hey, today we're going to delve into the side of the Old West that almost no one shows. The real lives of brothel workers on that wild frontier in the late 19th century. Forget the glamorous, colorfully lit films here. The story is raw, harsh, and often invisible. You might think you know what it was like, but the truth will surprise you. If you're enjoying these stories, please like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps bring you more real stories like this. Before we begin this journey, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring these profound and vibrant stories together. And if you can, leave a comment below telling us where you're listening to this story and what time it is where you live. I love imagining every corner of the world where these voices, bringing a bit of peace and reflection. Now, sit back and let this story transport you to a distant time, where every detail reveals the quiet strength of those who lived in the Old West. Waking up that morning was like feeling the weight of a tired body, sleeping poorly on a worn mattress and beds that creaked in the biting desert cold. The heavy smell of smoke, sweat, and unwashed sheets. Outside, the distant noise of the market mingled with the harsh chatter of men seeking shelter and some company. I knew the day would be long. The routine required much more than just being present. It required being ready for whatever came, even if it brought dangers the movies didn't show. Working in a brothel in the Old West wasn't glamour, it was survival. The summer heat was punishing, the winter cold paralyzing, and food was scarce and repetitive, almost always based on dry bread and some salt. There were no rest breaks. The body was a machine that needed to keep functioning despite pain and exhaustion. Violence was always lurking, not just physical, but emotional, in a place where sanity was protected by flimsy walls and suspicious eyes. Social life among us workers was a mix of solidarity and competition, where each day required strength to deal not only with clients but also with the diseases that circulated freely. Tuberculosis, syphilis, other illnesses threatened at every turn, and medicine was a jumble of rudimentary remedies and silent prayers. Living with men who arrived laden with grief, hope, and alcohol created an unstable environment, where the line between care and danger was too thin to ignore. Traveling to these locations was another challenge. Long journeys over difficult trails, riding tired horses, or in noisy carriages that kicked up clouds of dust. Armed for protection, workers and clients faced not only the elements but also the constant threat of attacks, robberies, and ambushes. Transportation brought with it the feeling that safety was a rare luxury, and each stop was a new test of endurance. Culturally, the brothel was a microcosm of the Wild West, a space where diversity and prejudice intermingled. Women of various backgrounds, including immigrants and indigenous people, shared a space marked by tensions and dispute. The role of women there was complex at once. Stigmatized and essential to the local economy, they lived in a social limbo that was rarely discussed. Survival required them to learn to adapt to unwritten rules and build invisible alliances. Medical care was limited to rudimentary and often dangerous practices. Popular knowledge mixed with beliefs and superstitions, and mortality loomed large. Many succumbed to the harsh conditions, leaving behind untold stories of suffering and courage. The fine line between life and death was drawn with every improvised consultation and home remedy. Reflecting on all this leads us to understand that life in those times demanded a courage we often fail to recognize. The Wild West wasn't just a stage for duels and heroic cowboys, but a territory of human resistance in its rawest form. May we remember these forgotten voices. Look beyond the myths Hollywood has sold us. If you connected with this story, leave a comment telling us where you're watching and what you thought. And don't forget to share it so more people can learn this. You've probably seen those images of the Wild West at some point: cowboys riding horses, dramatic duels at sunset, small, dusty towns with chandelier-lit saloons, where life seemed like a constant adventure. But today, I want to take you to a very different place, a place almost no one talks about, a reality hidden behind the bright lights of cinema and the romantic stories we're told. I want you to join me in the shoes of someone who actually lived on the American frontier in the late 19th century. not as a hero or an outlaw, but as a brothel worker, an invisible figure, forgotten by official history, but essential to understanding the harshness and complexity of that time. Imagine the infinite vastness of the frontier, where nature is at once beautiful and unforgiving, with its silent deserts, turbulent rivers, and dark nights that seem to swallow everything round them. There were no paved roads, public lighting, or the comforts we consider basic today. Their survival was a daily challenge, and every decision could mean the difference between life and death. And in this setting, within the simple, often poorly nailed wooden wall, where exhausted men sought shelter and relief, there were women who fulfilled a complex role, living a routine few dare imagine. Don't think that the Old West brothel was a party filled with laughter and lively music, as we see in the movies. It was a space where the struggle for a survival unfolded silently, often invisibly, hidden behind the curtains and the heavy smoke that hung in the air. There, each person carried their pain, their fears, and their hopes, a mosaic of intertwined stories amidst the dust and harshness of life. These women were not just workers, they were silent witnesses to a time when the world was changing, but where brutality and inequality still reigned. I want you, as you listen, to feel the weight of this reality. Don't be carried away by the beautiful and simplistic tale. I want you to travel with me, slowly, feeling the scent of aged wood, the rough touch of unclean sheep, the weariness that weighs on the bones of those who lack rest. Let's open the door to that little-known world and enter with respect and care to understand the lives of these people. In the end, I hope you see the Old West not as a fantasy, but as a place of courage and resilience, a real stage where humanity showed its lost face. If this journey interests you, and you'd like to learn more about these stories that time has tried to erase, I invite you to like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. This way, more people can hear these forgotten voices and learn to appreciate the true story behind the myths. Now that we've opened this door, let's move on. Prepare to experience the Wild West not through the television screen, but through the smell, sound, and texture of real life. And remember, every story I tell is a sigh of relief from someone who lived, loved, suffered, and endured. Are you ready to continue? Waking up that morning was like being awakened by a delicate yet unsettling symphony. There was no alarm clock, just the rhythmic, steady sound of the wind blowing through the cracks in the barely closed window, bringing with it the fine dust that tickled the face and the silent promise of a new, arduous day. The air was heavy, heavy with the smell of wood smoke and the sweat of those who had spent the night sharing the same cramps. The old wood of the bed creaked under the weight of a tired body, hunched over with the exhaustion of sleepless nights and even more difficult days ahead. Every muscle in my body seemed to protest waking. My bones ached as if crushed by invisible stones, and my skin bore the marks of rough clothing, of the night's chill that seemed to freeze the soul. I moved slowly, almost as if the very air around me was asking for kindness, inviting me to remain there, between the worn sheets, in that fleeting moment when pain and relief mingled. The sun was still setting behind the distant hills and mountains, but life on the frontier was already stirring. The first sounds were subtle, the jingle of a key being pulled from the door, the rustle of hurried footsteps, and the whisper of tired voices exchanging news, wishes, always whispering so as not to disturb those still asleep poor pretending to. The smell of watered-down coffee and burnt bread began to fill the small room, promising a meal that, though simple, provided the necessary strength to carry on. Smelling the ancient wood in history and secret made the thin line between past and present dissolve. Every piece of furniture, every object in that space had witnessed tears, shy smiles, silent fears, and suppressed laughter. It was a small place, warm with human, but cold with the heavy silence that only those who know the daily struggle can understand. Standing carefully, the contact of my bare feet with the uneven floorboards brought a strange sensation, a mixture of security and vulnerability. Each step was a reminder of the harsh environment we lived in, where the wild seemed to lurk just round the corner, ready to challenge at any moment. The open window let in a cool morning breeze, mingled with the distant scent of dry earth, animals, and the market beginning to fill with life. In that moment, I wasn't just a woman awakening to another day. I was part of that frontier, those inhospitable land, that time forgotten by facile story. My body ached, my heart raced at the thought of what lay ahead, but there was also a subtle strength, a silent, almost invisible determination, pulsing in my chest. It was the will to resist, to not let the harshness of that world destroy me. Each day on the border began like this, amidst the weariness that never quite dissipated and the small but firm hope that something better might come. It was a slow awakening, accompanied by sounds and smells that would forever be etched in the memory, marking not only the beginning of the day, but the constant struggle for survival in a world where safety was a rare luxury. And so, as the sun finally rose over the horizon, dyeing the sky with soft shades of orange and pink, I prepared to face another day in that land where few dared to be, and where each moment was a step between hope and fear. Waking that morning was a slow slip between dream and reality, a silent and delicate transition like the gentle movement of the breeze through the half-open window, bringing a breath of cold air and the dry scent of the earth that seemed never to rest. The wood of the bed creaked slightly under the weight of my tired and aching body, as if it to shed the fatigue accumulated over sleepless nights, where sleep was always interrupted by invisible shadows of worry and exhaustion. My body, still for a few moments, felt every muscle strained, every joint stiff, the remnants of the constant struggle against an unforgiving world. The sheets, rough and worn, barely protected against the cold that crept in through the cracks in the wall. The smell of sweat mixed with tobacco and a hint of dust permeated the air of the small, simple room, a precarious sanctuary where refuge was always temporary. Outside, the awakening of the frontier was more than a natural phenomenon. It was an invisible call, the first note of a symphony that would accompany the intense and relentless rhythm of the day that was beginning. The soft jingle of keys in the door, the distant whisper of tired voices, the uncertain bleating of a sheep, all these formed the backdrop of the dawn. Opening my eyes, the world seemed both familiar and strange. Sunlight filtered through torn curtain, painted golden spots on the faded wall. The wood floor, worn by time and use, was cool beneath my bare feet, a contact that made me feel even more alive, even as my body begged for a few more minutes. It was a slow, almost meditative awakening, where every movement had to be calculated so as not to awaken that sensation of pain that placed invisible limits on every gesture. My senses sharpened as I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the fresher morning air fill my lungs, mingling with the scent of wheat coffee and stale bread that would likely be my only food that day. The fragility of the situation manifested itself in every detail, the creak of the nearby chair, the soft slam of the door closing, the distant murmur of businesses already beginning to throb with life. It was a world where time seemed to run and stand still at the same time, where every moment carried the weight of urgency and pent-up hope. In that moment, as the sun began to warm the stones and dust of the street outside, I knew I couldn't allow myself to be weak. The harshness of life in the wild west demanded a strength that wasn't just physical, but deeply internal. Preparing for the day was a silent ritual, an internal conversation where I reminded myself that each step I took was a small victory against the relentless circumstances surrounding us. The effort of donning heavy clothes, soiled by time and use, was an act of resistance, a way of affirming that I was still there, ready to face whatever came. Every sound, every smell, every texture that morning formed a sensory tapestry that connected me to the harsh reality, but also filled with small moments of hidden beauty. The distant song of a bird, the slight vibration of the ground beneath the horse's tread on the street, the smell of wood burning in my neighbor's fireplace, all of this was part of the scenery that accompanied me as the world outside began to awaken to another day of challenges and silent struggle. And so, in that slow, calm awakening, enveloped by smells, sounds, and textures that seemed to whisper forgotten stories, I prepared to leave the refuge of my room and plunge into the intense reality of the frontier. world where courage was shown not only in grand gestures, but in every small act of continuing, of resisting, of surviving. The gentle awakening of morning gives way to the awareness of my tired body, still feeling the effects of the interrupted night. Where rest is always brief and superficial, I get up slowly, feeling the rough texture of my clothes against my skin, marked by night sweat and the accumulated dust of days gone by. Each step across the old wooden floor seems to echo a silent story of resistance, and the air around me is heavy, filled with mingled smells, tobacco, leather, sweat, and a faint aroma of simple food that tries to warm the soul. The routine that follows knows no indulgence. The sun is still low on the horizon, but tasks already await me with relentless demand. The day unfolds as a series of small challenges, one after the other, where the body becomes a survival tool that must work even when strength seems lacking. Waking up, tidying the space shared with other women, preparing the thin coffee that always seems more like water than drink, and nourishing oneself with what little there is, usually a piece of stale bread and some salted meat, repeated almost every day. Physical labor isn't something one can choose to ignore. It's present in every moment. Tidying the house, wiping down surfaces, preparing rooms for guests who might arrive later, ensuring that everything is within reach. These are repetitive gestures intertwined with the anxiety of knowing that the day could be long, and that safety is something earned with every passing moment. Summer heat can be relentless, punishing the skin and draining energy, while winter brings a chill that seems to penetrate to the bone, making every movement a struggle against immobility. The arrival of the first clients is a moment fraught with tension and anticipation. The community that forms within those walls is a microcosm of the world outside, full of complexity, conflict, and a strange form of solidarity. The body must be ready, the mind alert, even if often weary, must find the strength to remain steadfast. Clients arrive laden with story, pain, and hopes, and the responsibility of serving each of them amidst all this is a task that demands much more than appearance or willingness. Social life within the brothel is a mix of companionship and competition, where each woman seeks her own way to survive, support others at the same time, protect herself from the invisible wounds that work leaves. Whispered conversations between thin walls reveal fears and dreams, while outside, the world seems to follow its chaotic and untamed rhythm. Despite the hardship, there is a silent, invisible force that unites these women, a support network built in the shadow. Far from judgmentalized, routine is a continuous cycle, offering no pauses for emotional or physical rest. The body complains, the mind tries to take refuge in distant memories of better time, but the reality of the frontier demands total presence. Each day brings with it the challenge of staying on one's feet, of resisting the element, the rampant diseases, and the uncertainties surrounding the future. Exhaustion is constant, but so is the determination born of the need to survive, of not letting oneself be erased by the harshness of that. As night begins to fall, bringing the relief of coolness, the accumulated fatigue transforms into a strange mixture of sadness and hope. The silence that settles within the walls of the house seems to carry the memory of every moment lived there, and thoughts turn to what is yet to come. The daily routine in the Old West was not just a set of tasks, it was a way of life, a silent and continuous battle against the hardships of a savage and unforgiving world. In that place, surrounded by the vastness of the Wild West, social life had a unique quality, a mix of isolation and intense coexistence, where human relationships became the tenuous thread that sustained each person's fragile existence. Being inside that brothel was like being in a microcosm where emotion, fears, and joys intersected in a kind of silent dance, almost invisible to outsiders. There, socializing was both a refuge and a constant source of challenge. Each day brought different phases and stories that intersected in the shadows of the place. The men who had carried in their eyes marks of weariness, hope, despair, and often an uncertain search for some kind of comfort or redemption. They spoke little, whispering more, as if the very act of telling their stories were a risk. There were also the women, my companions on the journey, who shared the cramped spaces, shared secrets, and protected each other from the invisible and visible dangers of that world. Dangers, in fact, were ever present, like a shadow that lengthened with every step. Violence wasn't a distant threat. It manifested itself in sharp looks, harsh words, and sometimes in confrontations that quickly escalated, leaving physical and emotional scars that never completely disappeared. The law, when it existed, was often a distant idea, and justice was served on the dusty street in the decisions made by men who weren't always guided by benevolence. Diseases circulated freely among us, like a silent and lethal presence. Tuberculosis, syphilis, and other illnesses found fertile ground in that life filled with closeness and scarcity of medical care. Often, losing a partner was a silent blow, marked by anxious tears and memories that became stories told in whispers to protect the younger one. Precarious sanitation and hygiene made each day a struggle not only against the body, but also against the constant fear of illness. Even so, there were moments of restrained laughter and shared solidarity. Amidst the sighs and silence, there was a deep understanding that we were all survivors in that space and time. Friendship, even though marked by challenge, became an invisible shelter, a safety net against the outside world. We learned to read each other's looks, sense each other's gestures, and offer words of comfort when everything seemed to be falling apart. The constant feeling was that at any moment the balance could be shattered. The dangers outside assaults, ambushes, and the harsh reality of the frontier were reflected inside, where tension invited constant vigilance. Every noise, every shadow, could be a harbinger of something that would change everything. But courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to continue despite it. Thus, social life in the brothel was a mosaic of encounters and farewells, of smiles marked by pain, of looks that said more than words could express. It was a space where human fragility was revealed in all its nuances, and where hope, however small, still managed to shine amidst the darkness. As night fell, bringing with it the heavy silence of the border, I felt part of that web of life, struggle, and resistance. The outside world could be cruel and unforgiving, but there, within those weathered walls, there was an invisible force that united those scattered souls. It was a force that allowed me to face another day, even knowing that dangers were always lurking, ready to test my courage and my will to move forward. Mornings always began with the same slight tightness in my chest, a mixture of anticipation and apprehension that accompanied me every time the path stretched out ahead, uncertain and wild. Traveling in that time and place was not like today, when maps, paved roads, and modern vehicles make the journey easier. It was an adventure fraught with risks, where each step could be the beginning of a challenge, and each journey brought with it stories of overcoming and fear. The wind blew hard, carrying with it the fine dust rising from the dry, sun-beaten ground. The dry tree branches creaked under the weight of small animals that, frightened, disappeared among the rocks and bushes, the constant clatter of horses' hoofs on the path. Earth was the only sound that seemed to accompany our walk. Breaking the profound silence of the vast frontier, the horse, an inseparable companion, was at once a faithful friend and a constant responsibility. He felt the weight of my body, my hunger, my fatigue, and I knew my survival depended on. Mounting a tired horse after sleepless nights and hard days was an exercise in patience and courage. The skin felt the touch of the rough harness, the muscles adjusted to the animal's irregular movement, and the entire body had to balance itself to avoid falling over a rock or a hidden hole. Sometimes, the pain of the journey seemed to pierce through the joints, a pain that spoke of effort and endurance, of a silent connection between two beings who depended on each other to keep going. Transportation back then also meant braving the elements under the scorching midday sun. Sweat dripped down faces, soaking clothing that, though thick, couldn't protect against the relentless heat. At night, the cold cut like an invisible blade, making skin crawl and forcing people to wrap themselves in thin blankets that did little. Each change in weather was a reminder of human fragility in the face of the wild, and the journey continued even when the body longed only for rest. The paths we chose were often nothing more than tortuous trails, blazed by feet and wheels that came before us. Crossing rivers was a dangerous task, where the current could surprise us, and the mud stuck to our boots told stories of falls and slips. The landscape, at once beautiful and threatening, offered mirages of safety that were often just illusion. The horizon seemed too far away, and each stop was a silent conquest. Beyond the environment, there was the constant human threat, armed men who could appear at any moment, whether for a robbery or a confrontation that couldn't always be avoided. Being armed was more than a precaution. It was a necessity to ensure the journey wouldn't end prematurely. The weight of the weapon, the care taken to keep it safe and ready, was part of the routine, like a silent companion sharing the same uncertain fate. During the stops, fatigue mixed with the need to remain vigilant. The nights were long and silent, except for the sounds of nature, occasionally the footsteps of animals or unfamiliar people. Setting up camp in the solitude was an exercise in trust and fear, where sleep came slowly, always interrupted by the feeling that something could happen at any moment. Conversations with our traveling companion, when we had any, were brief and filled with a silent complicity. We shared stories, fears, and hopes in an attempt to make the journey less lonely. We knew that, despite the difficulty, each step brought us closer to a destination that represented a chance for a new beginning, a promise of better days. Even though uncertainty was always our constant companion, thus, travel and transportation on the American frontier were not mere displacement. They were chapters in a story of endurance, courage, and adaptation. Each journey was a challenge that tested not only the body but also the spirit, and where the beauty of the path blended with the harshness of reality, creating an experience, even today, resonates as a reminder of human strength in the face of the unknown. In that vast and inhospitable land, where the sky seemed to stretch infinitely over the dust and stones, culture revealed itself in a complex way, marked by diversity and the tensions that forced coexistence brought with it. Being there, in that stretch of the American frontier at the end of the 19th century, meant being immersed in a universe where different worlds collided, sometimes colliding, sometimes blending in a strange harmony. Culture there was not a simple set of customs or traditions, but a living fabric, shaped by necessity, fear, desire, above all, survival. I found myself among women who, despite sharing the same profession and the same space, brought diverse stories and origins. There were the newcomers, European immigrants who dreamed of a fresh start, and those with roots in indigenous lands or descendants of Africans who found on the frontier a way to escape the shackles. The past. This diversity created a vibrant environment, full of contrasts and nuances, where prejudice often hid beneath layers of necessity and camaraderie. Living with these differences was a constant exercise in adaptation. Languages mingled in the hallways and rooms, and simple gestures carried meanings that needed to be deciphered to avoid conflict. There was a delicate balance between respecting each other's origins and maintaining the unity that gave us the strength to face daily challenges. The border culture, with its harshness, imposed unwritten rules, which we learned over time and through experiences shared in whispers and knowing glances. Prejudice, unfortunately, was part of the landscape, manifesting itself in small actions and harsh words that highlighted differences and built invisible walls between those who, despite everything, shared the same struggle. It was a constant reminder that Wild West society, with all its apparent freedom, still carried the shadows of inequalities and hierarchies from the past. However, these barriers, however rigid, were also crossed by gestures of solidarity and friendship that defied expectation. The role of women there was particularly complex. We are often seen only through society's simplistic gaze, reduced to stereotypes that failed to capture the strength, intelligence, and courage we needed to live in that world. Within the brothel, we created our own forms of power and autonomy, building safety nets and survival strategies that went far beyond what others could imagine. Our culture was one of silent resistance, an active affirmation in the face of adversity. Each tradition brought from our origins intertwined with local practices, creating rituals and customs that helped us face daily life. Whether in the preparation of the limited food available, in caring for one another, or in stories told by the flickering light of candles, culture manifested itself as a bond that united us and gave us. These moments of sharing were precious, spaces where the hardships of life were softened for a moment, allowing hope to be reborn. Even though the frontier was a place of constant change and uncertainty, the culture built there had deep roots. It was a culture made of adaptation, but also of memories, dreams, and resilience. Each of us carried within us a piece of the world we came from, mixed with the experiences we had lived in that wild land. This blend gave rise to a unique identity, marked by scars, but also by a silent and powerful beauty. As the sun set on the horizon, tinting the sky with soft hues of orange and purple, I felt that, despite everything, we were part of something bigger story that still needed to be told with respect and sensitivity. The culture of the American frontier, especially within that little-known space, was a testament to human complexity, adaptability, and the invisible strength that keeps us going even in the most difficult time. In that time and place, medicine was not a precise or accessible science. Rather, it was a set of trials, improvisations, and silent hope, a fine line between cure and abandonment, between life and death. Being sick on the frontier often meant being at the mercy of home remedies, superstitions, and rudimentary practices that blended folk wisdom, remnants of ancient knowledge, and what could be found in small, makeshift pharmacies or with local healers. I remember well the feeling of fragility that took over my body when illness struck. There was no luxury or comfort, only the cold or warmth of the hut, the silent companionship of the dust, and the worried gaze of my companion. The fever that burned my skin, the cough that seemed to tear out my lungs, the wounds that took a long time to heal, all of this was experienced with a mixture of resignation and a desperate desire for a cure. And even when there was a remedy, it was no guarantee of salvation. Sometimes it was only a temporary relief from the pain. The medical practices I saw around me were simple and sometimes frightening. Bloodletting was common, as it was believed that removing a small amount of blood could drive out evil. Herbs, roots, and ointments prepared from the earth's resources were used to combat fevers, inflammations. In many cases, knowledge was passed down by word of mouth, in stories told with an almost sacred tone, as if these recipes held ancient and precious secrets. The presence of doctors was rare, and when they did exist, it didn't provide much comfort. Consultations often consisted of quick observations, recommendations for a treatment that we now know to be ineffective or even dangerous. Distance, limited transportation, and a lack of resources made access to adequate care nearly impossible, taking a heavy toll on the lives of those who depended on their help to survive illnesses and acid. And mortality was a constant shadow. Many could not resist illnesses that we now treat with, and each loss was felt not only as a physical absence, but as a blow to hope. The fear of illness was as great as the fear of violence, and human fragility was laid bare before the harshness of the environment. Resistance, then, was not just a matter of physical strength, but a daily battle against an uncertain destiny. Amidst this difficult reality, moments of tenderness and care emerged between us. The simple act of cleaning a wound, preparing an herbal tea, or offering a friendly shoulder was a gesture charged with meaning and humanity. Medicine, despite its limitation, also manifested itself through these connections, like an invisible link that united hearts in the fight against suffering. Each day lived with the disease was a lesson in the fragility of life and the strength of the spirit. I learned to observe my body's signal, to respect its limit, but also to seek, with quiet determination, any form of relief that might, even if it was simply the company and warmth of another person. And so, between the shadows of illness and the dim light of hope, medicine on the frontier was a story of resilience, courage, and humanity. Gradually, as night settled in outside, covering the land with its deep, silent mantle, I felt the exhaustion of the day transform into an almost meditative. It's strange to think how life on the frontier, so full of struggles and challenges, could also be subtly beautiful. The dust settled, the voices quieted, and the world seemed, for a moment, to breathe along with me. It was in that moment, amidst the fatigue and the silence, that the deepest reflection, those that cannot be expressed in words, but only felt with it, he recalled the pain, the fears, the small victories and defeats that made up that existence. It was impossible not to think how there wasn't a blazing, easily discernible flame, but an ember that remained lit even beneath the ashes of suffering. The courage to rise each morning, to face the unknown, to smile when everything seemed to fall apart. This was the true essence of the Old West, far from myth and legend. What do we learn from looking back on that life? Perhaps that human resilience is made of nuances, of small, silent moments that, together, build a mortal story. That strength often lies in delicacy, and that the act of simply carrying on is, in itself, a form of heroism. In that harsh world, every gesture carried an importance that we sometimes forget today, in our fast-paced, comfort-filled lives. Reflecting on all this, I felt a deep desire that these stories not be lost to time, that they be remembered with respect and sensitivity. May we look to the past not with judgmental eye, but with compassion and admiration for the complexity and humanity of those who lived before us. May forgotten voices be given space, and may we learn from them to value not only the great deeds, but also the silences and the invisible struggles. As the silence of the night deepened, I allowed myself this connection with the past, a bridge that connects distant times and hearts, despite being separated, share the same essence. This reflection was like a balm for the soul, an invitation to slow down, to listen, and to understand that, even in the most difficult moments, there is beauty and learning to be found. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you for sharing this moment of calm and discovery with me. I hope these stories bring some peace and reflection to your day, and that you feel invited to look at the world with more empathy and respect. If you enjoy this journey, don't forget to leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching. If you'd like, subscribe so we can continue exploring these stories that connect us together. I remember the few times I left that small fortress made of wood and silent stories to explore the world beyond its wall. Traveling, back then, was more than just a journey. It was an experience that awakened all the senses, a deep immersion in a universe full of danger, beauty, and uncertainty. Mounting a horse for the first time after days of confinement brought me a strange mix of relief and anxiety. My skin felt the chill of the wind cutting through the dust of the path, and my body, though exhausted, adapted to the irregular rhythm of the animals. Every touch of the harness, every sway of the horse, seemed to tell an ancient story, passed down from generation to generation, a silent link connecting us to those who crossed these lands before us. The paths were not simple. Often, they were narrow trails, lined with dry bushes and stones that seemed like guardians of time, silent witnesses to the journeys that unfolded there. The sun, relentless during the day, burned the skin and drained our strength, while the night brought a cold that seemed to penetrate to the bone, forcing us to seek shelter and protection, even if temporary. At each stop, my heart filled with a mixture of exhaustion and hope. Resting under the scant shade of a tree, drinking from a warm stream, exchanging quick words with other travelers, these moments, however simple, offered precious relief. They were small but crucial pauses on a journey that often seemed endless. Border crossing wasn't just about physical movement, but also about emotional crossing. Leaving behind the familiar and facing the unknown required quiet courage. Each step along the way was an affirmation of resilience, a declaration that, despite the difficulty, we continued forward, seeking something better, something we might not even know how to name. Weapons and precautions were constant companions. The fear of assaults, ambushes, and unexpected encounters with enemies or wild animals shaped every decision. Staying alert was vital, and the feeling of vulnerability could be overwhelming, but it was also what kept us alive. The frontier was a place where the line between safety and danger was too thin to ignore. As I followed the dusty path, The sounds of nature mingled with the horses' footsteps and distant voices. It was a scene at once wild and intimate, where every moment was filled with a delicate tension and a mixture of wonder and awe at the vastness that surrounded us. Traveling the frontier was, in a way, experiencing an ancient ritual, a dance between man and nature, between fear and hope. And even with all this hardship, there was beauty in that journey. The immense sky, painted with the colors of dawn or dusk, the brightness of the stars illuminating the silent night, the gentle touch of the wind carrying distant stories. Each journey was a learning experience, a profound encounter with oneself and the world, a rare opportunity to experience the true dimension of life. Medicine back then was a delicate dance between hope and fear, where every gesture, every improvised remedy, could be the tenuous thread separating life from death. I remember observing, with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, the small rituals that surrounded us when someone fell ill or was injured. There were no hospital, nor doctors on every corner. What we had was a set of ancient practices, some passed down from generation to generation, others born of immediate necessity, desperation, and the unwavering will to carry on. The simple act of tending a wound was almost sacred. The scarred skin, exposed flesh, and intense pain required more than courage. They demanded delicate care, steady hand, above all, patience. I watched the companions try to wipe away the blood with clean cloths soaked in warm water, while chanting soft, as if prayers could help ward off the evil lurking within. There was a deep belief that, despite limitation, it was possible to alleviate pain and heal the body, even when medical knowledge was scarce. Remedies were made from what the earth provided: bitter roots, dried leaves, herbs carefully gathered from the bush. Often, these preparations carried strong aromas, filling the air with silent promises of healing. But I knew these treatments weren't always effective, and that in many cases, the illness ran its inevitable course, leaving behind a trail of sadness and longing. The fear of losing someone was constant, and the powerlessness in the face of human fragility brought us even closer. I remember the stories that circulated, told in hushed tones, about healers who would appear from time to time, bearing mysterious potions and seemingly miraculous knowledge. Some were wise men, others charlatans, but all shared a fundamental rule in that community: the hope that, perhaps, healing was possible, even in the most difficult places. It was a hope that sustained us, even when our bodies weakened and our minds filled with doubt. Mortality was a shadow hanging over us, a constant reminder that time was short and that each day was a precious gift. I saw companions disappear, one by one, taken by illnesses that today would be easily treated. Loss was a silent blow, a wound that took time to heal and made us appreciate each moment of life even more. And so, between fear and resistance, we built our existence, clinging to the possibility of a new dawn. Despite everything, frontier medicine also had moments of tenderness. The shared care, the hand that held another in times of pain, the attentive gaze that sought comfort. These small gestures were as important as the medicines and techniques, for they carried with them the humanity that connected us, that made us feel we were not alone in the face of adversity. It was this humanity that gave us the strength to continue, to endure, to dream of better days. As the fire in the fireplace burned low, illuminating tired faces, I allowed myself this reflection. Medicine back then was not just a set of practices, but an act of life, a form of resistance and hope amidst the harshness of the world. And it is this story that I want you to remember, not just as a reminder of the past, but as an inspiration to value the invisible strength that resides within each of us. The sun was already beginning to rise over the horizon when my eyes opened to another day that promised to be as harsh as the last. The heat was still bearable at that moment, but I knew that as the hours passed, it would become relentless, burning my skin and draining my strength. This place, the American frontier, offered no respite, and the physical labor I endured was a constant testament to that harshness. Every movement, from the moment I rose from my hard bed to the moment I lay down at night, was a silent battle between my body and the environment. Carrying heavy loads, cleaning, preparing rooms, meeting clients demands everything required effort and endurance, even when my body cried out for rest. Dust clung to my skin and clothes, mixing with the sweat that ran down my face and neck, while the sun beat down merciless. The summer heat was almost unbearable. I felt it seep into my bone, making every gesture heavier, every step a challenge. Fresh water was a luxury not always within reach, and thirst was a constant companion that warned me of my body's limit. On the coldest days, the biting cold seemed to invade every fold of my clothing, freezing my fingers and making my entire body contract in a desperate attempt to warm up. Exposure to the elements made my skin rough, scarred by sun, wind, dust. It was a skin that carried the stories of each day, an invisible map of silent struggles. My hand, calloused and resilient, were indispensable tools for the exhausting routine, and my feet, though sore, continued to walk through those dry and unpredictable lands, working in that environment understanding that the body was an ally, but also a limitation. Every aching muscle, every sleepless night, was a reminder that survival depended on the ability to keep going, even when everything inside me was begging for a break. It was a delicate balance between strength and endurance, between accepting limitations and challenging the impossible. The unpredictable frontier climate added an extra layer of difficulty. Dust storms could suddenly appear, making the air unbreathable and forcing us to seek shelter. Rain, though rare, turned the roads into treacherous mud, making travel and work even more difficult. Each day brought a new challenge, and adaptation was the only certainty. Despite all this hardship, there were moments of simple beauty. The freshness of the morning, the silence before the start of activities, the sky painted with soft colors at dusk. These little things were like balm to the weary soul, reminders that even in adversity, life had its gifts in store. And so I continued, day after day, carrying the weight of exhausting work and facing the forces of nature, learning to respect my limits and celebrate each small triumph, because, in that world, resistance was a form of hope, and continuing was the purest expression of courage. What it truly meant to work in that environment, where the lines between duty and survival blurred, was something that could only be understood by living moment by moment, feeling the weight of the day-to-day grind that left no room for rest or weakness. The relationship with client, for example, wasn't limited to what was visible on the surface. It was a meeting of needs, fears, a silent search for some form of solace amidst the harshness of life. Each man who walked through the door brought with him not only a weary body, but also stories marked by loss, shattered dreams, and the constant pressure of a world where the future was uncertain. Hearing them in fragments, perceiving their hesitations and quiet vulnerability, made the work more complex than one could have imagined. It was a kind of silent exchange where we offered temporary relief, and in return, we gained the tacit understanding that there, too, was humanity, fragility. Not everyone was kind, and many carried the shadow of violence and despair in their eyes. The risk of tense or even dangerous situations was part of the routine, requiring constant vigilance and a firm stance that didn't always match what they felt inside. Every gesture, every word, was carefully measured to maintain a delicate balance between protection and assistance, between defense and openness. This forced coexistence created an environment of tension and solidarity, where relationships were built on fragile but necessary foundation. Silent alliances were forged among the women, an invisible support network that helped them weather the most difficult moment. We knew that, despite our differences and rivalry, unity was our best defense. Against the challenges that surrounded us, fatigue, both physical and emotional, was a constant companion. Dealing with the stress of multiple clients, the strain of constant exposure, and the need to maintain appearance was an almost superhuman effort. Often, what remained at the end of the day was a mixture of relief and exhaustion, a feeling of mission accomplished, even knowing that the cycle would repeat itself the next day. Despite everything, there were moments of laughter, shared stories, and small celebrations that softened the harshness of the routine. These moments, however brief, were like small lights on the path, reminders that, even in adversity, life went full of nuances and possibilities. Each day there was a learning experience, a silent lesson about the complexity of the human condition, about the need for compassion and resilience. And it was in this space, between fear and hope, that I found the strength to carry on, to resist, and to seek meaning amidst the chaos. The shadow of night brought with it a profound silence, which seemed to envelop everything with an almost sacred calm. It was in that moment, when the world slowed down and the noise of voices faded, that I found myself closest to myself, reflecting on everything that had happened that day. In that remote corner of the Old West, it was a time and a place where certainties were few and life often seemed like a delicate thread stretched between hope and despair. The surrounding environment, with its simple wooden walls and the gentle warmth of the fire, offered a contrast to the harshness of the day's journeys and encounters. Sitting there, feeling the crackling of the wood and the gentle aroma of smoke, I realized that true strength came not only from physical endurance, but from a spirit capable of bearing the weight of adversity with an almost invisible serenity. Each moment of silence carried an intensity that only time and experience could teach. Reflecting on the courage many needed to live there made me realize that the Wild West wasn't just a place of visible confrontations and dramatic duel. It was, above all, a land where everyday life unfolded in silent battles against fatigue, fear, loneliness, and the uncertainty of tomorrow. These daily struggles, invisible to most, revealed the human essence in its purest, rawest form. I reflected on the myths and stories the world told about that, and how little of them truly portrayed the complexity of real life. Movies and books often romanticized a scenario that was actually marked by suffering, injustice, and a constant struggle for survival. What I knew from personal experience was that the real story was made of small victory, hidden tears, and a silence that carried both pain and hope. At the same time, I felt profound gratitude for being part of that narrative, for having survived, and for being able to tell a little of what often remains in the shadow. It was an invitation to look more closely, to listen more sensitively to the voices that time tries to erase, and to recognize the humanity that pulses even in the most difficult places. Enveloped by the stillness of the night, I allowed myself a moment of peace and connection with everything I had experienced. I knew that dawn would bring new challenges, but also the opportunity to continue, to resist, and to be part of a greater story, made of courage and silence, of strength and tenderness. The silence of the night fell slowly, enveloping every corner of that small wooden house with an almost comforting softness. I sat by the window, watching the stars timidly appear in the dark sky, that vastness that seemed to hold ancient secrets and told stories, and the memory of so many lives that had passed. It was in this quiet moment, away from the noise and pressures of the day, that I found space to think, to reflect on everything I had experienced, everything I had learned, above all, to recognize the strength that had brought me here. Life in the Wild West was very different from what you imagine. It wasn't just the sound of gunfire and the cowboy adventures depicted in books and movies. There was a reality of quiet resistance, of small, daily battle, of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances with courage and dignity. It was a story that deserved to be remembered with respect, without the false glitter of spectacle, but with the depth of human experience. I thought of the women who walked beside me, the companions who shared my same struggle, who, despite all the difficulty, found ways to support each other, to endure, and to build a sense of community amidst the hardships. Each face brought a unique story, a past filled with pain and hope, and a present marked by the courage to carry on, one day after the next. This courage wasn't loud or spectacular. It was a quiet flame, burning in the chest even when the body was exhausted, even when the future seemed uncertain. It was the strength that allowed us to wake up every morning, get out of our hard beds, and face the world outside, a world that often offered no mercy. This strength lay in the determination to live, to love, to dream, even when it seemed everything conspired against us. As the wind blew gently, lulling the night, I felt a deep connection with those who came before and those who would come after. The story we share is made of simple moments, of gestures. Though small, carry immense meaning. It's a story of humanity, of struggle, and of hope. One that deserves to be told and heard with an open heart. And so, as the stars shone above, I invite you, who are there on the other side, to remember that even in the deepest shadows, there is always a light that never fades. That true strength lies in resilience, in the ability to continue, to reinvent oneself, and to find beauty even in the most difficult circumstances. May we carry this message forward with calm and respect, honoring those who lived and endured. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to leave a comment, share where you're watching. If you wish, subscribe so we can continue this journey together, discovering forgotten voices and learning from them to value life in all its complexity. At the end of the day, when the sun sets and the vast sky is clothed in soft colors, as silence invades the heart, an invitation to deep reflection on all we have experienced and witnessed. Sitting by that window, I feel the light night breeze caress my face. Memories rive fragments of stories lived on the frontier. Echoes of voices that struggled to exist amidst the harshness and the unknown. It is in this silence, so full of meaning, that I realize the true value of each moment, of each silent struggle that makes up the essence of life. The Wild West, so mythologized and romanticized, reveals itself, in truth, to be a stage where humanity reveals itself in its most authentic and cruel form. There, where nature imposed its rules and man found himself challenged at every turn, courage was shown not in heroic duels, but in small gestures of resistance, in the simple act of continuing to breathe, love, and dream. These discreet lives, often invisible to official history, are those that carry the true soul of that time. I learned that human strength lies in resilience and the ability to find light even when darkness seems absolute. Every shared story, every hidden tear, and every furtive smile bear witness to a struggle that transcends time, teaching us to appreciate the delicacy of existence. That scene, so distant and difficult, reminds us that life is made up of complex moments, where pain and hope coexist in balance. I invite you, who join me on this journey, to look beyond myths and stereotypes. May we honor the forgotten voices, those who resisted in silence, building, with their quiet courage, the foundations of the world we know. May these stories inspire us to cultivate empathy and respect, remembering that behind every era are real people, with their pain and their strength. As the night progresses and the sky fills with silent stars, I feel a deep connection with all those who have lived and endured before me. This connection is a reminder that, despite adversity, life is a continuous thread of experience, learning, and transformation. And it is in this thread that we find hope, meaning, and the beauty of existence. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share your reflection. Tell me where you're listening and join me as we continue to unravel the stories that time has nearly erased. May we, calmly and carefully, continue exploring these stories, finding peace and meaning in each word.